Picture two doctors standing at the foot of your hospital bed. Same diagnosis, same surgery, same odds pulled from the same chart. Doctor 1 looks at you and says, 90% of people survive this operation. Doctor 2 looks at the same chart and says, 10% of people die on the table. Read those two sentences again, slowly this time. They're the same number. 90 live, 10 die out of every 100 people who go under. Nobody changed the surgery. Nobody changed the odds. Only the sentence changed. And if you put 100 people in that bed, one at a time, and let each of them hear only one version, something predictable happens. The mortality sentence loses. Not by a little, by a lot. And it happens almost every time. In almost every study anyone has ever run on it, including on people who should know better, nurses, statisticians, doctors themselves. The surgery didn't get riskier. The wording did all the work. Psychologists have a name for what just happened in that hospital room. They call it the framing effect, the finding that the exact same fact, wrapped in a different sentence, can flip a decision without changing a single number underneath it. It isn't a rare glitch that shows up once in a strange experiment. Once you know to look for it, it turns up everywhere, in disease outbreaks, in hospitals, in supermarkets, in the exact words an insurance ad or a nutrition label chooses. 3 studies, run across 3 decades, map out how far it actually reaches, and none of them needed a trick question to work. The subjects just heard one honest sentence instead of another. In 1981, psychologists Tversky and Kahneman ran an experiment that would go on to reshape how economists think about choice itself. And it starts with a disease, not a hospital room. They told people to imagine an outbreak, expected to kill 600 people, and gave them a choice between 2 government rescue programs. Nothing fancy, just numbers on a page and a decision to make. Half the room got the choice framed as gains. Program A saves 200 people for certain. Program B has a 1 in 3 chance of saving all 600 and a 2 in 3 chance of saving no one at all. Most people, 72%, took the safe bet. Program A, the sure thing. Nobody wants to gamble with 200 already guaranteed lives. The other half got the exact same underlying choice, just worded as losses instead. Program C, 400 people will die, for certain. Program D, a 1 in 3 chance that nobody dies, a 2 in 3 chance that all 600 die. Now watch what happens. Program A and Program C describe the identical outcome. 200 saved is the same fact as 400 dead, out of the same 600 people. But framed as a loss, people flipped completely. 78% chose the gamble, Program D. Only 22% took the safe option, same 600 people. Same arithmetic, run through a calculator either way. Different sentence, a choice that very nearly inverted. Picture the outcome as a photograph and the wording around it as the frame. Point the frame at what people stand to gain, and they play it safe, protecting the guaranteed 200. Point that same frame at what people stand to lose, and they gamble instead, risking everything rather than accept 400 deaths as final. The photograph never moves. Only the frame does, and it's strong enough to talk 78 out of 100 people into a bet they'd have refused an hour earlier. Economists at the time assumed people weigh a decision by its outcomes alone. The Asian disease problem showed the sentence describing those outcomes mattered just as much, cleanly enough in a lab setting that the finding couldn't be waved away. That result was strange enough that a few years later, a team of doctors decided to test it somewhere it would actually matter, an oncology ward. In 1982, researcher Barbara McNeil and her colleagues asked 424 people, patients and physicians among them, to choose between 2 treatments for lung cancer, surgery, or radiation. This is the exact scenario the hook opened on, and it's a real study, not a hypothetical. The medical data behind both options was identical. Only the wording changed. One group heard the survival frame. Of 100 people who have surgery, 90 are alive at the end of the first month. The other group heard the mortality frame. Of 100 people who have surgery, 10 die within the first month. 90 alive. 10 dead. Out of the same 100 people, drawn from the same medical records. Framed around survival, surgery looked like the obvious choice. But framed around mortality, with no visible death rate attached to the alternative, radiation suddenly looked a lot safer by comparison. The share of people who picked radiation over surgery didn't nudge a little. It roughly doubled, comparing the mortality-framed group against the survival-framed group. And this wasn't a room of confused strangers pulled off the street. Some of the people making this call were physicians, trained, reading real statistics for a living, the kind of people you'd expect to see straight through a wording trick. The frame still moved them almost as much as it moved everyone else. Same photograph, different frame. Except this time, the photograph was somebody's actual chance of surviving cancer, and the choice on the table would decide how they spent the years that were left. So maybe you're thinking, fine, but that's a hospital. Life and death, of course the wording matters there. The stakes are enormous and people are scared. The part that should bother you more is this. The exact same trick works with nothing at stake at all. In 1988, researchers Erwin Levin and Gary Gaeth walked into somewhere a lot lower stakes than a hospital, the meat aisle. They gave shoppers ground beef to taste and rate. Half saw a label reading 75% lean. The other half saw a label on the exact same meat reading 25% fat. Same product. Same fat content, down to the gram, scooped from the same tray. People who saw 75% lean rated the meat as better tasting and less greasy, higher quality, before a single bite than people who saw 25% fat. That's the framing effect showing up on a grocery shelf, with nothing but a sticker doing the persuading. It's also a slightly different flavor of the same trick. The disease study and the hospital study both reframed a bet, a risk, a gamble, a chance of one outcome or another. The meat label reframes a single fixed fact about one product, with no gamble involved at all. Levin and other researchers later split framing into two families for exactly this reason. Risky choice framing, like the disease programs. Attribute framing, like the beef label. Different mechanics, same result. The wording still wins. What actually matters most, though, is this. Once people tasted the meat, the gap between the two groups shrank. Direct experience pushed back against the label. The frame is powerful, but it isn't all-powerful. It loses ground the moment reality gets a vote of its own. A disease outbreak, a cancer ward, a pack of ground beef. 3 completely different rooms. 3 different kinds of stakes. Same trick, working almost every time. So why does a sentence do this to a brain that thinks of itself as rational? The answer traces back to the same 2 researchers in a separate paper they published 2 years earlier, in 1979. They called it prospect theory, and it would eventually win its own Nobel Prize, so it's worth getting the mechanism right. The core idea: you don't judge value in absolute terms. You judge it relative to a reference point, a mental zero line that the sentence itself quietly sets for you before you've even started weighing the options. Say 90 survive, and the reference point becomes life itself. Anything short of full survival now reads as a loss from where you're standing. Say 10 die, and the reference point flips to death. Now every survivor reads as a gain you weren't expecting, a bonus rather than a baseline. And losses, prospect theory found, loom larger than equivalent gains. A loss stings roughly twice as hard as an equal-sized gain feels good, which is why people turn cautious, risk-averse, the moment a choice is framed around what they'd gain, protecting the sure thing rather than risking it. And it's why those same people turn reckless, risk-seeking, the instant the identical choice gets framed around what they'd lose, gambling to avoid a loss that already feels locked in. Chase the safe, 200 saved. Gamble to dodge, 400 dead. Same 600 lives sitting on the table either way. Opposite instinct, depending only on which side of the frame somebody handed you first. It's the same mechanism at every scale in this video. The disease programs set a reference point around lives, and the beef label set one around fat versus leanness. One framing family is built on risk, the other on a fixed attribute. But both work by quietly deciding, before you've weighed anything, what counts as a gain and what counts as a loss. In 2002, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for this body of work. Amos Tversky would almost certainly have shared it. He died in 1996, 6 years before the prize was awarded, and the Nobel Committee doesn't give it to the dead. Here's the uncomfortable part. You cannot simply decide to stop being moved by framing. Knowing the trick exists doesn't automatically cancel it out. 90 survive still sounds better than 10 die, even to you, right now, even having just watched the two sentences sit side by side and do the math yourself. What actually helps is slower and a lot less satisfying. Before a decision that matters, ask what the other frame would say. Hearing about the 90% who make it? Go find the 10% who don't, and sit with both numbers for a second before you choose. A choice that feels obviously safe or obviously urgent, stop and ask whether that feeling is coming from the facts or from whoever picked the words you heard first. Go back to those two doctors at the foot of the bed. Neither one lied to you. Neither one hit a single number. They just picked which side of the frame to hold up first, and your decision followed the frame, not the facts hiding behind it. Somebody, somewhere, framed the last big decision you made: a sale price, a survival rate, a warning label, a headline. The only real question is whether you noticed.